Good News Sports is brought to you by Faith Life Financial and Wise Choices.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to The Edge on Good News Sports. I'm your host, Glenn Allan. Many men define themselves by their careers, leadership positions, or physical appearance. When a guy loses a job, gets fired, leaves a ministry position, or has a health crisis, he may struggle to redefine who he is. This episode will explore who I am as the panel discusses what they've learned from the devastating experience of being fired from a job or other life experiences that have cut at the core of their identities as men. Let's meet the Edge panel here on Good News Sports, beginning with radio host Drew Marshall from The Drew Marshall Show on Joy 1250 Radio. How you doing, buddy?
Nice to see you. You're pumped up? Good to go?
I am. We also have on the program former CFL superstar quarterback Kent Austin. Welcome to the program, buddy. Good to see you. Have a seat. Have a seat. We're going to put you right here. Good to see you. Also from Promise Keepers Canada, author and speaker Steve Masterson, my friend.
Howdy, Glenn.
Always good to see you.
Good to see you, too.
You didn't say that to me.
What?
You didn't say that to me.
Well, for good reason. And the $1 Million Man, former superstar, WWF, WWE wrestler. Welcome to the program, my friend.
Glenn, love you, buddy. How are you?
Good. Good. Guys, in this particular program, especially as in the sports world, Kent, you went through it recently with the Toronto Argonauts. Ted, recently with the WWE being released, going through...
Fired.
Okay.
Yeah, that's more accurate.
Yeah.
Hey, why don't you say what you mean down there, Drew? Come on, man. You know?
But it's tough. You know, we look at the identities that are formed when we're young, what we want to aspire to, and finally we make it, and man, there's sometimes we got to face rejection. And how do we find that identity? We won't start with Drew. Struggling to find success, struggling to find out who we are. And really that's what we're going to talk about today on the program. Ken, walk us through the position being fired as offensive coordinator with the Toronto Argonauts. Not only do you get fired, but then you have to read about it for the months to come.
Yeah, right.
Some people lose their job and that's it, that's all.
Yeah.
You lose it and you got to keep reading about how your offense.
Right,
Yeah.
That's right. Well, that comes with the territory with respect to the career that I'm in. But, you know, the good news is that I learned a long time ago in my relationship with Christ that I'm not defined by what I do or the accomplishments that I have with respect to what the world says, but who I am, and that is a child of God. So
The Jesus stuff takes a bit of the edge off, right? But it doesn't ever just make it all peachy, does it? You think?
It still hurts.
It doesn't, but as you know, as the Scripture teaches, right, as you guys know, that there's a war between the flesh and the Spirit, and we're called as Christians to walk by the Spirit and not by the flesh, and so it's really an issue of surrender. And I just decided that when I got fired, that I wasn't going to surrender to the flesh, and that I was going to honor God in the process, and as best as I could.
You touched on that as best you could.
Right.
You know, partway through the season, you're let go, you're fired, and the team's going along. They do well, they don't do well, whatever the case may be. You're being compared to Adam Rita's offense. You know, well, when they're under Kent's regime, they were doing this, and under Adam, it's this. It's like, leave me alone, man. You fired me, just leave me. So, I understand what you're saying, but there's guys out there who have been rejected, who have been fired, and they don't have that foundation, that walk with God, and it's tough for them. But even those who do have the foundation with God, when you're let go, it can throw you into a tizzy, especially when there's a paycheck coming in.
Absolutely, and as you well know, Glenn, I just went through this, you know, and I have been regarded and respected in the wrestling industry as, you know, they came out with a magazine, you know, the top 100 wrestlers of all time, the top 50 in the WWE, you know, and I was in both those numbers, and I'm not bragging, but
Yeah, you are. Come on.
Yes, I am. Okay, I was great, man.
You brag.
I was a wrestler, but when I went back to the company, I went back in the role of like an advisor to a team of writers, kind of like I'm not an actor now. I'm going to be like in a directing role or you know, it's like just because you're a great actor doesn't make you the director or the producer. and I said, you know, here I am. I even told them when I took the job, I said, I don't know that I'm going to be very, very good at this. And I tried my best, and the bottom line was I wasn't that good, and they let me go, and now I'm back in full-time ministry. But when they let me go, there was a letdown. And even during the process, while I was there, it was like I always took such great pride in being the best at what I was doing, and I didn't feel that I was. And you know, the flesh again, it was like, you know what, you know, I'm a failure, you know, and you know, what's wrong with me?
We're insecure wimps. I think we are. I think the North American male has got to be one of the wimpiest guys in the face of the planet.
Where's the backbone of the Christian man?
In the toilet. It's brutal. Seriously.
Well, you said before that we were talking about this before. You were talking about men and
what, being confused and with our identity and all that stuff?
Yes.
Is that what you're trying to get at?
Yeah. Well, I didn't know which way I was going to go because you threw out a couple words. I'm going, I don't want to say that one on the air.
No, I think we are. I think we're confused. We're spineless, gutless wimps who are just thick at the best of times. And then we got these demonstrative women trying to find their identity. And do we buy into the women's lib crap, or do we, you know, do the church woman thing and submit and just be all lovely and stuff? And they're trying to find where they're at. We're trying to find where we're at. And, you know, next thing you know, we're all Oprahized. Is that a word?
It is now.
You know, there's something fundamental here. Lucille Ball asked Burt Reynolds, when does a boy become a man? And Burt gave a rather wise response. He said, when his daddy tells him so. And my experience with so many of us men is our fathers have never spoken into the depths of our identity as males, especially when we move through the rite of passage from boyhood into young manhood and make that declaration. My father didn't with me. And I mean, I was 2.5 months premature, and I weighed 2.5 pounds, and I was really scrawny and wimpy till about 17 or 18 years of age. And I remember the very first pair of skates that I ever got for Christmas when I wanted to learn how to play hockey with all my buddies.
Like figure skates?
They were white girl skates. And I mean, I used black shoe polish and
probably shouldn't laugh at that, eh?
Yeah, but and I felt this shame that I was the only boy out there with girls' white skates on.
Geez, did they hurt you at all?
What, my parents?
No, the other guy.
Skates,
the other guys.
Other guys.
Yeah.
No, I was such a wimp they couldn't catch me because I was so scared I skated fast. But I mean, you know.
Sorry, yeah, I got it.
I'm dealing with my own, where my identity started. And so what I needed at some point was some confirmation from my own father, which I only got when he was 72 and I was about 52. He finally, you know, but that's only part of it. The other issue is understanding that the root of my identity as a man ultimately comes from my sense of sonship with God the Father.
That's right.
And
I don't understand that at all. I have no idea what you just said.
I think I know what he's saying. I know that when I was raised by a stepfather, Mike DiBiase was my stepdad, but my dad was a national amateur wrestling champion out of the University of Nebraska and a professional wrestler for 20 years until his death. As a young man, I looked at my dad and I said, you know what, if I can be enough like him, if I can be and model my life after his, I'm going to be successful in life. So my dream and my goal and my identity, so to speak, was in trying to be like him. The great thing about my dad was he said, you don't have to do what I did to please me. He says, I want you to be passionate about whatever it is your dream is. And I said, Dad, my dream is to be just like you. Now as a Christian, you know, I've switched that and understand, even though my dad is the very first hero I ever had in my life, that now I must have that same attitude of heart. My identity has got to be in, I want to please my King and my Savior. And as long as I am modeling my life after his and trying to have the character of Christ, that's where my identity is.
Well, what about the guys that are watching and they don't buy into the God stuff as much as you all do, okay?
Right.
Like, aside from saying to them, hey, just buy into the God stuff, like, do you give them some other advice as far as getting through life to be a man?
Well, at least to start by having a father affirm his boy's manhood.
Which most fathers don't do. We've already
right.
acknowledged that.
That's
So
right.
now where do they go? They're not into the God stuff. They haven't had a father say, you're a man now, son, and go and kill. I don't know, whatever they say.
But
Well,
I mean,
you know what,
don't you? I mean, fundamentally, don't we have to get down to what the issue is? And the issue is what we were created for. And men, you know, I understand what you're saying, but men need to come to that decision point in their life. They need to come to the decision on what they were created to be. And ultimately, we were created to glorify our
so,
Creator.
So you're saying again to the guys that are watching who aren't into the God stuff, you got to get into the God stuff before you can get the man thing down?
If you give them some other answer, all right, that other answer will only be temporary.
Temporary, okay.
But
and it won't work.
But in the beginning, though, and I'm going to go back because a lot of people know that I'm in recovery from alcoholism and a cocaine addiction, and going through treatment centers, actually 2 of them, and in that recovery was learning how to talk and say,
Right.
I hurt. Right. I was sexually abused over an 8-year period as a young boy growing up, and it wasn't actually my bottom. Part of my bottom in getting that springboard, that second chance at life was becoming Christian, but I didn't even know what that meant. But by being in those walls of the treatment centers and those people helping me and talking to me allowed me to say, they asked me those questions that I didn't want to answer, and that lump would come into my throat and my eyes would tear up because I'm trying to, like I said in the opening, that trying to be that macho or live up to the identity the media makes of men. And all of a sudden, I start crying, and I start pouring my heart out to this counselor. And I went to bed, I think, at 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock that night, and slept all the way through to the next morning because I finally relieved myself of all that burden. I agree with what you're saying. Eventually, without Christ in your life, it's very difficult to sustain that. But
you're saying you can be honest with your emotions before maybe the big God move.
That may help get you there. That may help get you there. We have to.
Right.
We're going to take a time out. We're going to pick this up when we come back. But today we're talking about identity of men on Good News Sports. Back right after this.
The preceding segment has been brought to you by Faith Life Financial.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to The Edge on Good News Sports. Glenn Allan, Drew Marshall, Steve Masterson, Kent Austin, and the $1 Million Man, Ted DiBiase. Today, talking about men and their identity. Just before we went to break, guys, just talking about finding that point in my life when I was able to actually share and not be afraid of being laughed at. Guys are afraid to share their feelings. They're afraid to talk about the past, to talk about the hurts, because there are some people out there who call you a wimp, this, that, and the other thing. That's a lie. That's the lie that I lived by for years, and that I stuffed everything to the point where it came out in fights and anger and all those other things and addiction. But, I mean, trying to find that identity, especially when you don't have a father at home or an absent father, somebody who isn't giving you your love. We talked in another program about how, we talk about the daughters and what happens when the daughter doesn't have her father. It's so very important that as a man we find that identity. And again, we were talking about our sons and what they say to us. Kent, your little guy says to you, what?
Yeah, well, Wesley's asked me has stated to me on numerous occasions. He said, "Dad, when I grow up, I want to be just like you." And of course, when you know you're imperfect, it kind of
scares you.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, you take pause, and so I always ask him back a question in return, and well, what does that mean? What do you mean by that? And 100% of the time, he always comes back with relational answers.
Like what?
Like, I like how you treat people. I like that you have character. I like, these. I mean, he doesn't say those exact words, but it's ultimately relational with him. He's connecting with my heart, right?
Also
Not what I do, right? Not even so much what I say, but how I act and how I treat him and treat the kids and treat my wife and those types of things. And I think that that's a mirror image of our Father, right? Our Heavenly Father, is that ultimately everything with Him is relational, and He wants us to connect with His heart. When we do that, then we can connect with what our true identity is and why we're here.
And the same thing you're saying, again, with my dad, again, being raised by a loving stepfather, and it's like every time somebody would say to me, "Well, he's not your real dad," well, those were fighting words to me, because he was the father figure in my life, and he's the guy that stepped in and made me feel like his very own son. And as I went through life and I got into wrestling, and I would meet other men who would say, "You know what, not only was your dad a great athlete," he says, "your dad was a great guy. Your dad helped me when I was down and out. Your dad,
So you learned from other people how cool your dad was?
I did, as I was going through life, but I knew he was a great guy when I was
for his dad.
Yeah, which.
Steve?
Every son longs to be held in the heart of an older man, and that should be his father. And if it isn't, then he he needs to seek out another man and find that place where his rightful place in another man's heart. Because Malachi, the last book of the Old Testament, Malachi says, see, I will send you the spirit of Elijah, and he'll come and turn the hearts of the fathers back to their children and the hearts of the children back to their fathers. And if that doesn't happen, if the father won't do that, then he says, I'll send a curse on the land. So something's pretty critical about fathers giving their hearts away to their sons and daughters that avoids a curse on the land. And we see the curse in the land today with a lot of fatherlessness.
I was going to say, because I talk to a lot of men, you know, and we got a bunch of wimps in America. I mean, we've got an epidemic of fatherless children, and I'm not just talking about parents that aren't there, that divorce or just have children and leave. I'm talking about dads who go to work every day, and when they come home, they sit down in front of the TV and they hit the clicker, and their sons and their daughters go to the recitals and the ball games, and they're sitting on their duff watching a ball game.
Or sitting in the bars.
Absolutely. You know, and if those children don't get that love and that attention and those things we've been talking about from that dad, then they're going to maybe get it from a football coach, or they're going to get it. That's why they all go into gangs.
It's not
because they're getting their identity from somebody who's going to love them.
And the other group that preys on that is you look at I was groomed to be abused. You know, my
pedophiles would
pedophiles look for that. I mean, we had a big family. I don't blame my parents one iota. My dad worked long hours. My mom had 4 other girls to look after, and I went with other people, and unfortunately, that's what those sick people look for. But I mean, you know, one of the things that I see, especially being part of Promise Keepers today, and watching the events that we had recently, Calgary, Regina, and Hershey, those conferences. But watching the men come together and then looking at those guys who hear about other people who battle alcohol or other addictions, whether it be drugs, sex, or whatever the case may be. But then they find out that they can go and hook up with other groups, like a small group, and talk to other guys. And I don't mean the people who are going to judge them, because stigma, it's really tough as a guy to say, I'm hurting about something. You know, small groups. And Kent, I know the Argos and with Steve Kearns and the chaplaincy and stuff. Those small groups and those Bible studies for just men, where they can come together and share, are so important.
That freaks me out, man. I can't get into that whole share. No, a room full of guys and getting all open and touchy-feeling.
Well, I think
singing
most
Kumbaya.
men. I think most men.
Well, that's not
probably
what they
find
do.
one or two guys that they become close friends with. I know that's been the experience of my life. I don't go and share in front of 20 men, but I have always had one or two very, very close friends who I connect with that I trust ultimately. You know, to share things with, because he can relate on a different level than my wife can. But getting back to the heart thing, I mean, I don't. Men can be strong, and men can set boundaries, and men can be leaders, and men can have character, and can impart those things to their children, and that's what their wife wants. But ultimately, if you do that without having your children and your wife connect with your heart, right, you become nothing more than a warden.
Yeah, you know what? You have to be man enough to be vulnerable.
That's right.
You know, guys look at me. Guys look at me and they see this successful athlete and wrestler and all this other stuff, but when I can open up and say, you know what, I was the biggest jerk that ever walked. I said, I didn't have the right attitude towards women. I used a lot of women. I almost lost my marriage. I said, you know, I was selfish. I was, you know, when I can open up and say that and be honest about, you know, my failures, guys that will identify with that, and they say, well, gosh, you know, if he can do it, I can do it too.
And that's what happens in a small group that's working and run properly.
Right.
Is somebody sitting there talking about who will be vulnerable. The treatment center that I was in, I had a bodybuilder and a longshoreman who shared before me, and they both broke down, tears, snot bubbles, the whole bit. They made it okay for me. They made it okay for me to be vulnerable, because especially as in my background with being abused, I didn't trust anybody. And anyone who laughed at me as a person growing up, I would just as soon knock you on your butt than, you know, I had all those masks on and all those boundaries around me protecting. I was going to be hurt again. So when you talk about the small groups, those the ones that are running properly.
This is the Promise Keeper stuff?
Well, there's the discovery groups. Paul Henderson's been doing it.
Right.
Core Path out in Calgary. There are groups where guys get together and they cut through the chase. And they're small groups, 8 to 12 guys. And they get to know, and over time you build that trust and you build those relationships, and things do open up. I mean, when recovery, and I talk about recovery, when recovery is done right and done properly, That's why people get better, because
You
they're getting rid of the burden.
You got to take the mask off. A good friend of mine in the wrestling industry, who, he said, "Yeah, Ted, I'm a Christian too." And then I'd see him over there reading the Playboy magazine. I'd see him in the bar having a drink. I'm a Christian too. Well, we finally got him to come to this athletes conference that I go to every year in Phoenix. And there's Sting, who's a wrestler. There's Nikita Koloff, a wrestler. There's me. There's Animal and Hawk, who are wrestlers. And in this worship service, we're there like this with our hands open before God, weeping tears. And this friend of ours sees this. And that's what broke him, when he saw us willing to put down the male ego and, hey, I'm a tough guy, and see that we were willing to do that. Man, he was the guy that answered the altar call.
Mel Gibson.
No, Drew Marshall. Hi.
Hi, yeah, where are you? Good to see you.
Confusing, I understand, but
Concussions.
yeah,
Sorry.
yeah. What do you want?
Well, you talked about the small groups that, or not small groups, but
What women want?
Yeah, what women want. Thank you.
Are you guys as confused as I am? Like, I'm watching I don't sit at home and watch this stuff all day, but the Dr. Phil and the Oprah stuff and all the we're supposed are sensitive and listening and male. But yet I asked a couple women the other night. We were in a big group. The husbands were there too, and they said, no, we want the guy's guy, and the guys who are all listening and soft and tender and communicating and stuff. Actually, kind of worried about those guys, because they're like that with other women. So they get worried about that stuff. So are we supposed to be macho male warriors, still kind of, spitting in the toilet, or are we supposed to be doily boys?
I think there's a balance. There's a balance that you have to.
Spitting in the toilet and being a doily boy?
Yeah, be careful.
Well, the critical issue from God's perspective is he's created us in his image and likeness, and he's created us as males in his likeness, and we reflect something about God that women don't reflect, and they reflect something about God that we don't reflect. And I think one of the things that God asks us as men, and he's created us to reflect, is his strength and his courage and his initiative and he's placed in us testosterone and aggressiveness, and God gets aggressive, and that all gets try to trimmed out of us, and God wants us to move and to speak into chaos and emptiness and darkness and bring about order and life and light. And so God's heart is really for us men to take a stand. And I know with my own son, I modeled vulnerability. And I pray with my son, and I get my son to pray for me.
And we have to. And we know what, we have to go to another break. Back with more Good News Sports right after this.
The preceding segment has been brought to you by Wise Choices.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the show. Guys, listen, we need to be the kind of man our kids can look up to. If you didn't get what you needed from your own dad, find an older mentor that can help you form a solid identity in Jesus Christ. Have the courage to take off your mask and get real with people you can trust. For more information or resources, please go to goodnewsports.ca. Until next time, thanks for watching, and please make a difference in your family's life.
Good News Sports has been brought to you by Faith Life Financial and Wise Choices.